In this video, I'll show you how to create this simple and minimalistic calendar card in Home Assistant. We first need to create our own calendar template sensor, so we can use that in the dashboard. As always, the full code can be found on the Gumroad link in the description. For this, you will need to have Button Card from Hacks installed. For this to work, you will obviously need a calendar integrated into Home Assistant, so you have something to pull the data from. For this example, I will use Google Calendar. You can see that I have a calendar that pulls in the next Manchester United games. I use fixture.es for this. It creates calendars for a bunch of sports teams, and you can just add it to your calendar app of choice. If you look up your calendar in DevTools inside Home Assistant, you can see that we only get info about the next event. So we will need to create our own template sensor with more upcoming events. If we go into the Actions section in DevTools, we can run the Calendar Get Events action, and if we set a long duration, you can see that we can pull in more upcoming events than just the next one. We can use this to create a template sensor. So let's jump into our configuration.yaml file. A lot of people have had problems with creating template sensors when I've done this previously. To do this properly and to keep things neat, I recommend you include a file called template.yaml in your configuration.yaml file. But you also need to be sure that all your template sensors are created inside this file. If you already have template sensors in your system, and most people will have some already, you need to create the sensor I'm about to show together with your other ones. As you can see in my configuration.yaml file, I've defined template only once. This can't be in multiple places. With that out of the way, let's jump into this template.yaml file. I've created some space at the top for this, but you can create the sensor wherever you want. Start by writing -trigger:. I want this to trigger or update every hour and when Home Assistant starts. So let's add those two triggers. This is kind of like creating an automation with YAML code. Then let's add an action that will happen when this triggers. Also notice I had the wrong indentation for the triggers above. I'm just going to paste in the action we tested from DevTools earlier. We just need to add a dash before the first line and move the whole block a bit to the right. It seems a bit weird that we write action twice, but this is because we can add multiple actions here. Now this will be stored into the response variable, so we need to grab the content of this variable and store it into an actual sensor. The sensor is actually pretty straightforward. I just give it a name, unique ID and icon. For the sensor's state, I'll just count the number of events. This will be useful later when creating the dashboard card. Then I'll create an attribute called events. This is just the same code as before minus the count part. It simply puts all the calendar events into an array. We need to use an attribute for this list rather than the state since attributes don't have character limits. Now I'm going to go into the DevTools again. Here I'll check the configuration and then I'll do a restart since this will only update every hour, and when Home Assistant start, I need to do a restart instead of reloading the YAML config. And you can now see that the sensor shows up and I have an events attribute with 7 calendar events. I'm going to start by creating a vertical stack card, then add my trusty custom button card to it. I'll add the calendar as an entity, and I'll hide the icon and name. I'm going to add everything using custom fields, so I'll first create a custom field called day. Here I'll type returnEntity.attributes. So button card no, we want to use one of the attributes of the entity we have defined at the top. The attribute we want to use is called events. So we need to add .events as well. Remember this is a list, so we need to tell button card to display the first of this list. We do this by placing 0 inside square brackets after events. Now we need to tell button card what part of the first list item we want to display. I want to use the start time, so I'll add .start at the end of it all. This will display the start time of the first calendar event in the card. Of course it looks crazy and pretty much unreadable for a human, so let's use one of the built-in helper functions in button card to display the time in a bit more human-friendly format. For this, I just want to display the day of the week, so I can just copy that helper and paste it before entity and after return. We just need to make sure we place the old code inside brackets. Now it should just display the weekday, in my case it's Sunday. Now I'm just going to do the same with a new custom field called date, but this time I'll use the date short helper instead. I'm just going to quickly add a basic grid so that we can see the values a bit better. I'll change this later. I'll create another custom field called time and use the 24-hour time helper. Last custom field we need I'll call Event. In our sensor, this is called Summary, so I will just remove the helper and replace Start with Summary. I'm going to start by setting up a proper grid. This will be a 2x3 grid. I'll first add 2 apostrophes that we place everything inside, then each row will be inside 2 quotation marks. First row will be day and dot. The dot is just an empty grid cell. Second row will be date and time, and the third row will be date and event. Then I'll start styling the individual elements. First, the card will get an overall padding of 20 pixels. Then I'll add Justify Self-Start to each of the custom fields. Then if I change the grid template columns to min content 1FR, the first column will be smaller than the second. Now I can just adjust the font sizes. I want the date to be huge, so I set it to 3 EM. I also want it all uppercase, then I add some padding to the right as well as a 1 pixel border to the right. This last bit in the border is a color variable from my theme file. My theme is linked in the description, but you could just replace this with a hex color instead. Then I'm just going to add the opposite padding to the event and time, so that the border is placed right in the middle. Then I'll set the font size of the time to 1.4 EM. Alright, almost done with this card. If you follow football, you might notice that I just jumped ahead a few weeks. I had a little break from recording. Man United are still rubbish, though. What I want to do now is style the card a bit differently if the calendar event is happening today. We can do this by using the state function in button card. Specifically, we can use a template operator to check if the event start date is the same as today's date. This might look a bit crazy, but it isn't really that bad. First, we create a new date object using the start time we've used before. Then we convert this to a string, or a text element. Then we add 3 equal signs, and then create a new date object with today's date. So this code is essentially checking if the start date of the first event matches today's date. If it is, I will have a different background on the card, and we can test this by manipulating the date after the equal signs. Now I just want to change the color of the fonts and the border to be black instead of white. Cool, this is pretty much the finished card for the first event. But I have one more trick I want to show. This is, however, very specific to my calendar, but you might want to use this same calendar as well. Since all the event summaries are formatted the same, it is possible to manipulate the output of the custom fields. For example, I would like to put each team on separate lines. It would then use less horizontal space and will still tell me it's a game between 2 teams. If you thought the previous code was tricky, then this is a step even further. So I'm just going to paste it in and place it in the video description if you want to use it. One tip here though, don't be afraid to ask AI about this kind of stuff. Both OpenAI and Claude can really help here. I had to add text align left to make both lines be left aligned. Then similarly, I wanted to move the little tag at the end of the summary into the time custom field. This little tag tells me what competition the game is in. And that's my finished card. You might not need that last bit, but I thought it would be handy to keep in. Maybe you can use it for something else. Now let's have a look at how we can create a simpler card for more calendar events. I would probably like to display 4 or 5 upcoming events. Since we already have the vertical stack, I'm just going to add the next card to that. But we have to be a bit clever. If we just add a similar calendar card, we might end up with a bunch of errors if there isn't any upcoming events. So I will first add a conditional card, then I'll choose the numeric state entity condition. I will then find my calendar and check if the state is above 1. I then just add a dummy alarm card to be displayed when this condition is true. We can then go back to the very first card and copy the whole code and paste it instead of the alarm card. We now have 2 identical calendar cards, so let's just edit the second one so it's a bit simpler. First, I'm going to delete all the state conditional styling, no need for that here. I will then also delete the day custom field, the first row of the grid that displays the day custom field, and styling as well. My theme has cards placed really close together, so I'm going to add a margin top of 12 pixels. Just moving the custom fields to the bottom so you can see a bit better. Now I'm basically just changing the font sizes. The time font size will be reduced to 1.2 EM, and the date to 1.6 EM. I will then set a fixed width for the date. This is so that the vertical line will match when we have more of these cards. I'm also removing the line break in my event code. Now I'm just adding some dummy text at the end of the event text. You can see that the text will go all the way to the edge of the card. If we just set the width of the event to be 100%, It will automatically add ... at the end of the text, indicating that there is some text missing. If we instead of 100% add a little calculation, we will also get our nice card padding back. And just to be sure, I also specify that I want ... at the end, just in case certain browsers or apps don't do this automatically. Now I want to mention, I was playing around with CSS animations for this, and it does work and looks great. But it's not really usable for this. The reason is that we don't know how long the text is, and we also don't have access to how long the card is with just CSS. Therefore, if we were to add animation to this, like scrolling back and forth, it would either be always animation or never animation. I think for this, it is better to not use animation, because it would be weird if this text that's perfectly readable would animate. I will, however, make a video all about CSS animations, because it's pretty awesome. Alright, let's continue. I'm going to go into this card's full code so that we can also see the conditional card, and copy the whole thing. Then I'm going to paste it onto a new card in the stack. All I want to do with this is change the ones to 2, both the conditional card condition and the custom fields. And you can see that I actually forgot to do this for the first small card I created. And now we just need to repeat this however many times we want. I added cards for 6 upcoming events. You can see when I add the last one that I get a bunch of error messages. But that's okay because this won't be displayed in the dashboard, so our conditional card saves us. Okay, this is turning into a really long video, but I had to add one more change to the very first card because I realized that there might not actually be any events at all. We could just add the first card into a conditional card, but it would be a bit weird if the dashboard was just empty. So I ended up adding a second state condition that check if the entity value is 0. If it is, I set the date custom field to just display some text. I also set the background to red and make the date font size much smaller. Lastly, I hide event day and time custom fields by using display none. And you can see that this will work quite well in the dashboard. And that's the finished card. Hopefully you learned something from this. I think it turned into a really nice looking card. I have this in a pop-up that I can open from the main page of my dashboard. This seems to have a really high wife acceptance factor as well. And if you're a football nerd like me, you can of course automate the speakers to let everyone know that there's a game happening soon, and then turn on the TV at the correct time. In my next video, I'll give you an updated tour of my current dashboard, as decided by the channel members in the Discord channel. Thanks for watching. Until next time.